I'm Major Lena Rourke, 33, and I built my career the slow way: discipline, long hours, and 1,000 quiet wins no one ever clapped for. For years, I held my family together, backed every deployment, and did everything expected of the reliable one. But when a Navy commander tried to pull rank on me during a blind date, grabbed my wrist, told me I'd do as he said, I made a decision that changed both our careers. Have you ever been dismissed, disrespected, or blindsided by someone you tried to give the benefit of the doubt? If you have, share your story in the comments. You're not the only one who's been there. Before I dive into what happened, tell me where you're listening from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after someone crossed a line, hit like and subscribe. What happened next even I didn't see coming. I walked into Ventos at 18:30 hours expecting an awkward dinner my mother had orchestrated. She'd been relentless about this blind date for weeks, insisting I needed to meet a real military man who understood the life. I wore my service dress uniform because I'd come straight from the Joint Operations Center, my Air Force major's oak leaves crisp against my shoulders. The restaurant hummed with the usual Friday evening energy, couples leaning across candlelit tables, the soft clink of wine glasses, laughter threading through conversation. He was already seated when the hostess led me over. Navy Commander Thomas Keating, 05, late 30s, shoulders squared like he was perpetually standing at attention. He didn't rise when I approached. His eyes flicked over my uniform with an expression I'd learned to recognize over 12 years of service, assessment followed by a barely perceptible tightening around the mouth. You're late, he said. I glanced at my watch. 18:31. My apologies, Commander. Traffic from Andrews was heavier than expected. He gestured to the chair across from him with a kind of economical movement that suggested he was accustomed to being obeyed. I sat, setting my service cap on the empty chair beside me. He'd already ordered himself a bourbon, the glass half empty, condensation pooling on the white tablecloth. Your mother speaks highly of you, he said, though his tone suggested he was reserving judgment. She mentioned you're stationed at Andrews. Administrative work. Special staff assignment. Joint task oversight and inter-service coordination. Something flickered across his face. Not quite displeasure, but close. Interesting. I'm with surface warfare. Real operational command. Just finished a deployment cycle in the 5th Fleet AOR. I nodded, reaching for my water glass. Before my fingers touched the stem, he continued. The problem with joint assignments is they pull good officers away from their core competencies. Air Force should stick to air operations, Navy to maritime. We dilute effectiveness when we try to make everyone interchangeable. I'd argue cross-service perspective strengthens operational planning, I said evenly. We're more effective when we understand how our sister services operate. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's the party line, sure. In practice, I've seen too many joint task officers who don't know their primary mission anymore. They become generalists. Military needs specialists. The waitress appeared, a young woman with dark hair pulled into a ponytail. Can I get you started with drinks? She'll have a white wine, Commander Keating said before I could open my mouth. House is fine. The waitress glanced at me. I met her eyes and said clearly, actually, I'll have sparkling water with lime, please. Of course. She left quickly, sensing the tension. Keating's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Not a drinker? Not tonight. I have an early brief tomorrow at 0600. It's Friday night. You should relax. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with the kind of scrutiny I'd endured countless times, the look that said I was being measured against some internal standard I hadn't been informed about. Your mother mentioned you're not seeing anyone seriously. Career-focused, she said. I respect that, but there's something to be said for balance. I maintain balance just fine, Commander. Tom, he corrected. We're off duty. You can drop the formality. Except we weren't off duty. We were both in uniform. Military bearing didn't stop because we'd left base. But I nodded politely and let it pass. He launched into a story about his last deployment, a situation involving a junior officer who'd questioned his orders during a port visit. I had to remind him that there's a chain of command for a reason. Some of these kids come out of the academy thinking they can debate every decision. Not how it works. You follow orders, you learn, you earn the right to question later. I listened, noting how every anecdote circled back to his authority, his judgment, his command presence. He spoke in declarative sentences, brooking no interruption. When I tried to contribute an observation from my own experience, he talked over me, pivoting back to his own narrative as though I'd never spoken. The waitress returned with my sparkling water. Keating ordered for both of us, without asking what I wanted: steak for himself, salmon for me. "You look like a salmon person," he said when she left. "Healthy, careful. Am I right?" I would have preferred the chicken, actually. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You can change it when she comes back." But he said it in a way that suggested changing it would be making a fuss, being difficult. I let it go, filing the moment away with all the others accumulating like evidence in a case file. He asked about my assignment again, and this time I elaborated, mentioning the 4-star admiral I'd worked with on a recent inter-service logistics initiative. His expression went carefully neutral. "Joint task oversight," he repeated slowly. "So you're essentially a staff officer. Coordination, paperwork, that sort of thing. Analysis, strategic planning, resource allocation across service branches, conflict resolution when operational requirements overlap." Right. Important work, I'm sure. The dismissiveness in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. He took a long drink of his bourbon. "I'm tracking for O6 selection next board. Captain's list. It's pretty much assured at this point. My eval scores have been top block for 4 cycles running. Congratulations." After that, it's about positioning for the right command billet. Maybe a destroyer squadron, or if I play it smart, something in strike group operations. He leaned forward, warming to his subject. "That's the difference between staff work and operational command. Staff can make recommendations, but command makes decisions. Lives depend on those decisions. Not everyone has the temperament for it." I sipped my water, studying him over the rim of my glass. His posture, the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes kept scanning the room as if cataloging potential subordinates or threats. This was a man who viewed every interaction through a lens of hierarchy and control. "Your mother said you wanted to meet someone who understood military life," he continued. "Most civilian men can't handle dating a woman in uniform. They feel threatened, or they don't understand the demands. But between us, we get it. We know what the life requires." That's true to an extent. Which is why I think this could work. He said it like he was presenting a strategy brief, laying out a conclusion already reached. "You're attractive, clearly intelligent. I'm established, on track for senior leadership. Your mother's right, we'd be a good match. Stable. Both understand sacrifice and service." The presumption in his words landed like a challenge. We'd been sitting together for barely 20 minutes. "I appreciate the assessment, Commander, but I think we're getting ahead of ourselves." His smile tightened. "Tom. And I'm just being efficient. No point dancing around it. We're adults, we know what we want." The food arrived. He immediately cut into a steak, the knife scraping against porcelain. I picked at the salmon I hadn't wanted, my appetite gone. He talked between bites, gesturing with his fork, dropping names of senior officers he knew, commands he'd held, awards he'd received. When the waitress refilled his bourbon, he called her sweetheart. Then he turned to me, mid-sentence, and used the same word. "Thing is, sweetheart, you seem like you're trying to prove something." I get it. Women in the military face challenges. But at some point, you have to accept that some roles are just better suited to whom. I kept my voice level professional. He paused, recalibrating. "To people with certain temperaments. It's not about gender. It's about natural leadership capability." I set down my fork carefully. "I see." We finished the meal in strained silence. When I reached for my water glass, his hand shot out and closed around my wrist. Not violently, but firmly. Decisively. His thumb pressed against my pulse point. "You'll do as I say, sweetheart," he said softly, almost gently. But the grip was steel. The restaurant noise fell away. Every instinct I'd honed over 12 years of military service crystallized into absolute clarity. I looked down at his hand, then up at his face. His expression held challenge and expectation. He wanted submission, acknowledgement of his authority. I applied a simple leverage technique, rotating my wrist inward and breaking his grip without force, without drama. I placed both hands in my lap. He forced a laugh, too loud. "Just playing. Little test. You passed." But we both knew what had just happened. The mask had slipped. This wasn't awkward personality clash. This was something far more deliberate. He leaned forward, trying to reclaim the moment, voice dropping to what he probably thought was persuasive intimacy. If you want a man who can take care of you, you need to learn to listen. Understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that this dinner was over, that my mother's judgment had been catastrophically wrong, and that Commander Thomas Keating had just shown me exactly who he was. I need to use the restroom, I said, standing. Excuse me. I walked toward the back of the restaurant, my mind already shifting into operational mode, cataloging details, preparing for what would happen when I returned to that table. Because this wasn't ending with a polite goodbye and a promise to never speak of it again. This was just beginning. I stood in the bathroom, hands braced against the cool marble sink, breathing slowly through my nose. In the mirror, my reflection looked composed, uniform crisp, expression neutral, every hair in place. The training held. It always did. But underneath the professional veneer, something had shifted, hardened into diamond-sharp resolve. He touched me. More than that, he'd used his authority, his rank, his assumption of dominance to try to control me. In public. In uniform. And he'd called it a test. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened my contacts, scrolling to Captain J. Park's number. Jay had been my roommate at Squadron Officer School, one of the few people I trusted completely. I typed quickly, blind date went sideways. Call you after. I'm fine. Her response came immediately. Need backup? No. Have it handled. Just needed to tell someone. Roger. Standing by. I slipped the phone away and straightened my uniform, checking the nameplate, the ribbons, the oak leaves. Everything in its place. When I walked back out there, I needed to be absolutely certain of what I was doing and why. The facts were clear. Commander Keating, 05, United States Navy, had physically restrained a fellow officer during a social encounter, used language suggesting command authority over me despite no supervisory relationship, and attempted to coerce compliance through intimidation. This wasn't sexual harassment in the traditional sense. It was conduct unbecoming an officer, abuse of position, and a violation of the core values every service member swore to uphold. I could walk away. File nothing, tell my mother it didn't work out, block his number, move on. That's what most people did. That's what women in the military learned to do when the fight seemed too costly, the system too indifferent, the personal toll too high. But I'd also spent 12 years watching men like Keating move up the chain of command, leaving wreckage behind them, junior enlisted who didn't report, female officers who quietly requested transfers, a culture of looking the other way because it was easier than fighting. I thought about the Admiral's coin in my jacket pocket. I'd earned it 6 months ago during a particularly complex joint operation where Air Force, Navy, and Army logistics had gotten tangled in contradictory requirements. I'd spent 72 hours straight coordinating between services, running interference, solving problems that senior officers said couldn't be solved. The 4-star had presented it to me personally, in front of the Joint Task Staff. Major Rourke, he'd said, this represents trust. Inter-service accountability. When you carry this, you carry the authority of this office to ensure our people operate with integrity across branch lines. I hadn't fully understood what that meant until now. I pushed open the bathroom door and walked back to the table. Keating was on his phone, scrolling with his thumb, bourbon glass refilled. He looked up when I sat down, smiling like nothing had happened. Thought maybe you ditched me, he said, attempting charm. Would have been embarrassing, getting stood up in uniform. I needed a moment. Look, if I came on too strong earlier, I apologize. I'm direct. It's how I lead. Not everyone appreciates it initially, but it's effective. He set his phone down, leaning forward with renewed focus. Let's start over. Forget the rough patch. Tell me what you're looking for in a relationship. The audacity of it, the assumption that his apology, hollow and self-serving, would reset the evening. That I'd forget the wrist grab, the condescension, the deliberate testing of boundaries. Commander Keating, I said quietly, I don't think there's any relationship potential here. His expression darkened. You're making a decision based on one awkward moment. I'm making a decision based on your behavior throughout this entire dinner. My behavior? He laughed, sharp and disbelieving. I've been nothing but respectful. I picked a nice restaurant, I ordered you a good meal, I've been patient with your career talk. If anything, you've been cold from the moment you sat down. You ordered my food without asking. You interrupted every sentence I spoke. You grabbed my wrist and told me I'd do as you say. I was joking about that. Jesus. Can't you take a joke? I reached into my uniform jacket and withdrew the small leather coin pouch I always carried. I opened it slowly, deliberately, and removed the Admiral's coin, heavy brass, embossed with the Joint Task Force insignia and the 4 stars personal seal. I placed it on the table between us with a soft, definitive sound. The color drained from his face. He recognized it instantly. Every military officer would. Commander Keating, I said, voice level and professional, you're currently interacting with a joint oversight officer operating under the authority of a 4-star admiral for inter-service accountability and conduct standards. What you just did, grabbing my wrist, issuing what you framed as an order, testing my compliance, constitutes conduct unbecoming an officer in a public setting. Do you understand what I'm telling you? He stared at the coin like it was a grenade. That's not, you can't just, it was a date. You can't turn a bad date into some kind of official incident. You made it official when you used rank and authority dynamics to intimidate a fellow officer. That's not dating. That's misconduct. This is insane. His voice rose slightly, drawing a glance from the neighboring table. He forced it back down. You're overreacting. You're twisting a simple social interaction into something it's not. I signaled the waitress and requested the check, keeping my eyes on him the entire time. Wait. Panic crept into his tone now, the command presence evaporating. Don't file anything. Please. This could ruin my career. I'm up for captain next board. This kind of complaint, even unfounded, it follows you. It destroys selection chances. Then you should have behaved like an officer. He reached across the table, not touching me, but his hand hovered there, imploring. I have 20 years in. I've served honorably. I've led sailors through combat deployments. You're going to throw that away because I misread some social cues on a blind date. You didn't misread social cues, Commander. You grabbed my wrist. You told me I'd do as you say. You've spent this entire evening treating me like a subordinate who needed to be brought in line. I paused, letting the words settle. And now you're telling me that reporting your behavior would ruin you, which means you understand exactly how serious it is. It was a mistake. One mistake. I'll apologize properly. We can talk this through. Mediation. Informal resolution. You don't need to go nuclear. The waitress brought the check. I placed my credit card down before he could react. He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it, recognizing that fighting over who paid would only make things worse. Here's what's going to happen, I said quietly. I'm going to file a factual report with the Joint Ethics Office detailing tonight's events. What happens after that isn't my decision, it's the system's. If you've truly served honorably for 20 years, one incident might be viewed as an aberration. But something tells me this isn't your first time. His face went from pale to flushed. You don't know anything about me. I know you grabbed a fellow officer and expected compliance. I know you view authority as dominance rather than responsibility. I know you tried to control every aspect of this dinner from the moment I sat down. And I know that when confronted, your first instinct was to gaslight me into thinking I'd misunderstood. This is because you're threatened by strong men. That's what this really is. There it was. The final tell. When reason failed, when apologies didn't work, blame the woman. I signed the credit card receipt and stood, picking up my service cap. I'm not threatened by strong men, Commander. I work with them every day. I respect them and they respect me. What I don't tolerate is abuse of authority masquerading as strength. He stood too, and for a moment I thought he might try to physically stop me. His hand twitched toward my arm, then froze as he realized we were in public, in uniform, and anything he did now would only compound the damage. You provoked me, he said, voice low and bitter. Women like you push and prod until a man reacts, then you cry victim. You'll ruin a man's life over nothing. I met his eyes, holding his gaze with the same steady composure I'd maintained since the moment he'd first grabbed my wrist. You're right, Commander, I said softly. This can ruin you. But I'm not doing it. You did. I walked out of the restaurant into the cool November evening. The parking lot lights cast orange halos on the asphalt. I stood next to my car for a long moment, breathing in the night air, feeling the adrenaline begin to ebb. My phone buzzed. Jay, status? I typed back, heading home. It got worse before I left. Filing a report tomorrow. Need me to come over? No. But thank you. I got in my car and drove toward Andrews. The highway's quiet this late on a Friday. The radio played something instrumental and forgettable. My hands were steady on the wheel. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was calm, clear, and absolutely certain of what I was about to set in motion. Because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Commander Thomas Keating specifically. It was about the oath I'd taken. It was about the junior female officer who'd sit across from a senior male officer someday and need to know that the system worked. It was about making sure that men who viewed rank as permission rather than responsibility faced consequences. When I got home, I'd write the report. Factual. Unemotional. Time-stamped. Then I'd send it to the Joint Ethics Office and let the process run its course. Whatever happened next wasn't my burden anymore. It was his. I grew up in a military family, which is probably why my mother thought she understood what kind of man I needed. My father, Senior Master Sergeant Daniel Rourke, had served 28 years in the Air Force before retiring. He was quiet, methodical, the kind of NCO who led by example rather than volume. He deployed 6 times during my childhood, missing birthdays and holidays, but when he was home, he was fully present, helping with homework, coaching my soccer team, teaching me to change a tire in our driveway on Saturday mornings. My mother, Elaine, had built her identity around being a military wife. She knew the protocol, attended the spouse's events, managed our household through every PCS move with ruthless efficiency. She believed in the institution absolutely, trusted its hierarchy, respected its traditions. To her, rank equaled character. A man who'd risen to commander had proven himself worthy through years of service and evaluation. The system, in her view, filtered out the undeserving. I'd believed that too once. I joined ROTC at University of Maryland with romantic notions about service and sacrifice, about being part of something larger than myself. My father never pushed me toward the military. If anything, he warned me it would be harder for me than it had been for him. You'll have to be twice as good to be considered half as competent, he'd said during my sophomore year when I told him I was committed to commissioning. And even then, some people will never see you as anything but a woman in a man's uniform. He'd been right. I commissioned as a second lieutenant at 22, assigned to logistics initially, then force support, working my way through the career field with steady, unremarkable competence. I deployed to Afghanistan at 25, managing supply operations for a forward operating base. I learned to navigate the peculiar social dynamics of being one of 3 female officers in a unit of 60. I learned which battles to fight, standing up when senior enlisted made inappropriate comments in briefings, and which to absorb silently, the casual exclusion from informal planning sessions where real decisions got made. I made captain at 27, right on schedule. The promotion felt validating, proof that performance mattered more than politics. I threw myself into the work, volunteering for additional duties, taking on projects that stretched my capabilities. I missed my father's retirement ceremony because I was in Qatar coordinating an emergency logistics push. He'd understood. My mother had been disappointed. By 30, I developed a reputation as someone who got things done. I was selected for a competitive staff assignment at the Pentagon, working in joint operations planning. That's where I learned that the real military, the one that determined strategy, allocated resources, made decisions affecting thousands of lives, operated at the intersection of services, ranks, and political considerations far more complex than anything I'd encountered at squadron level. It was also where I met the senior officers who either respected competence regardless of gender or resented it specifically because of gender. Colonel David Hensley, my first supervisor in that assignment, fell into the former category. He was Air Force, 06, 2 years from retirement, with zero patience for incompetence and complete indifference to office politics. During my in-brief, he looked at my file and said, "You deployed twice, you have a logistics background, and your evaluations suggest you don't need your hand held. Don't make me regret bringing you onto my team." I didn't. I worked 70-hour weeks, learned the bureaucratic labyrinth of inter-service coordination, earned the respect of peers and seniors through sheer competence. Colonel Hensley became a mentor, the kind who challenged rather than coddled, who expected excellence and noticed when you delivered it. When the Admiral's Joint Task Force needed an Air Force liaison for a complex logistics operation involving Army, Navy, and Air Force assets across 3 theaters, Colonel Hensley recommended me. The operation lasted 3 months. We coordinated transport, supply chains, and personnel movements across incompatible service systems, resolving conflicts that threatened to derail critical timelines. I worked directly with the 4-star, briefing him daily, implementing his guidance, troubleshooting problems that ranged from technical to interpersonal. When it succeeded on time, under budget, with 0 critical failures, he'd called me to his office. Major Rourke, he'd said, you've demonstrated the kind of cross-service leadership this military needs more of. This coin represents my personal trust in your judgment and your authority to act on behalf of inter-service accountability standards. The coin lived in my jacket pocket after that, a reminder that excellence could still be recognized, that the system could work. My mother had been thrilled when I made Major at 32. She'd attended my promotion ceremony, beaming with pride, telling everyone who'd listened that her daughter was following in her father's footsteps. But she'd also started asking about my personal life with increasing frequency. You're 32, Lena. You should be thinking about settling down. I'm focused on my career right now, Mom. Your career will still be there. But finding the right man, that gets harder as you get older. She'd started suggesting blind dates 6 months ago. I'd refused politely at first, then more firmly. She'd persisted with the relentlessness she'd once applied to organizing charity events and volunteer committees. When she mentioned Commander Keating, a decorated Navy officer, single, established, from a good family, I'd finally agreed just to end the conversation. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have recognized that my mother's understanding of military life was filtered through the lens of a previous generation, one where women served in support roles and deferred to male authority as natural order. She couldn't conceive that a decorated commander might be anything other than honorable, because in her framework, the rank itself conferred honor. She'd never had to navigate the meeting where a senior officer suggested your promotion might be easier if you were more approachable. She'd never endured the deployment where a peer officer assumed you'd slept your way into your assignment. She'd never sat through the evaluation where abrasive appeared as feedback for behavior that would be called decisive in a male officer. I'd learned to manage those experiences, to develop resilience, to focus on the work rather than the obstacles. I'd learned which mentors to trust, which peers would support you when it mattered, which fights were worth fighting. But I'd also learned that some patterns repeated across ranks, services, and generations. Men who viewed women in uniform as novelties rather than peers. Men who saw female authority as threat rather than asset. Men who believed compliance was owed to them by virtue of rank and gender combined. Commander Keating wasn't an anomaly. He was a type, one I'd encountered before in different configurations. What made tonight different was the clarity of the violation and my position to respond. The Admiral's coin wasn't just recognition. It was authority to enforce the standards we'd all sworn to uphold. As I drove home from the restaurant, I thought about my father. He'd passed away 2 years ago, quietly, from a heart attack in his sleep. The funeral had been full military honors, flag folding, taps, rifle salute. My mother had been stoic throughout, playing the role she'd perfected over decades. At the reception afterward, she'd pulled me aside. Your father was so proud of you, she'd said. He always said you were tougher than any airman he'd ever supervised. I'd cried then, finally, allowing myself the grief I'd been holding back. Because he'd understood. He'd known what it cost to maintain integrity in a system that didn't always reward it, to hold yourself to standards higher than those applied to you, to choose the harder right over the easier wrong. He'd lived those values quietly, never seeking recognition, never compromising. I thought about what he'd say about tonight. He wouldn't tell me to let it go. He wouldn't suggest I was overreacting. He'd ask one question: did he violate the standards? Yes. Then you know what to do. I pulled into my apartment complex at 21:15 hours, parked in my assigned spot, and sat in the silence for a moment. Then I went inside, changed into civilian clothes, made a cup of tea, and opened my laptop. The report took 2 hours to write. I included every relevant detail: times, locations, specific statements, the physical contact, the context of our respective ranks and assignments. I attached no emotional commentary, no interpretation beyond factual description. The Joint Ethics Office would conduct their own analysis. I reread it 3 times, checking for accuracy, ensuring the tone remained professional. Then I encrypted it, saved it to my secure drive, and prepared to submit it in the morning through proper channels. My phone rang at 2300 hours. My mother. How did it go? Her voice was bright, expectant. Thomas texted me that you two had finished dinner. He said you seemed lovely but reserved. I told him you take time to warm up to people. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. Mom, the dinner didn't go well. What do you mean? What happened? Commander Keating was inappropriate. I'm not interested in seeing him again. Silence on the other end, then a careful tone. Inappropriate how? He was condescending throughout dinner. He ordered my food without asking, interrupted constantly, and I paused, choosing my words carefully. He grabbed my wrist and told me I'd do as he said. Another silence, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice carried an edge I recognized from childhood, the one she used when she thought I was exaggerating. Are you sure you didn't misunderstand? Thomas is a commander, Lena. He's been vetted, evaluated, trusted with significant responsibility. He wouldn't just, Mom, I didn't misunderstand. I was there. But sometimes in social situations, especially first dates, people can be awkward. Maybe he was trying to be playful and it came across wrong. You can be very serious, honey. Not everyone knows how to read you. The implications settled like cold water. This was my fault, my seriousness, my failure to correctly interpret playfulness, my inability to give a decorated officer the benefit of the doubt. He wasn't being playful, Mom. He was asserting dominance. There's a difference. I just think maybe you're being a bit harsh. He's a good man from everything I've heard. His mother and I have been friends for years. She's told me about his service record, his deployments. Men like that deserve some grace. And what do women like me deserve? She sighed, frustrated. You deserve respect, of course. But you also need to be realistic about relationships. Military men are direct. They're used to command presence. If you're going to date within the service, you need to understand that dynamic. I felt something crack inside me, a foundation I hadn't realized was already weakened. My mother, the woman who'd raised me, who'd supported my commissioning, who'd attended every promotion ceremony, fundamentally didn't believe me. Or worse, she believed me and thought I should accept it. I'm filing a report with the Joint Ethics Office, I said quietly. You're what? Lena, no. You can't do that. It will ruin his career over a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding. And if his career is ruined, it's because of his behavior, not my report. This is ridiculous. You're overreacting. You're going to destroy a good man's reputation because he made you uncomfortable on a date. He didn't make me uncomfortable, Mom. He committed conduct unbecoming an officer. According to who? You? Based on your interpretation of a social situation. Her voice rose now, real anger breaking through. Do you know what this will do? Not just to him, but to you? You'll be known as the woman who files complaints over nothing. Who can't handle normal interactions. Who weaponizes the system against men. I stood up from my desk, phone pressed to my ear, staring out my apartment window at the parking lot below. A couple walked past, holding hands, laughing about something. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by hierarchies and regulations, and the weight of institutional betrayal. I need to go, Mom. Lena, please. Think about this. Sleep on it. Don't make a decision you'll regret. I've already made it. Good night. I ended the call before she could respond. Then I turned off my phone, set it on the counter, and stood in my quiet apartment feeling more alone than I had in years. But underneath the loneliness was something else, certainty. My mother's disapproval hurt. Her automatic defense of Keating, her willingness to blame my interpretation rather than his actions, that hurt worse. But it didn't change the facts. It didn't alter what had happened. And it didn't absolve me of the responsibility to report misconduct when I witnessed it. I thought again about my father, about the quiet integrity he'd modeled. He'd taught me that doing the right thing often meant standing alone. That popularity was a poor substitute for principle. That the uniform demanded more from us than comfort or convenience. Tomorrow, I'd submit the report. Whatever came after that, the investigation, the blowback, the career implications, I'd handle them the same way I'd handled every challenge since commissioning. With discipline, professionalism, and the confidence that comes from knowing you've acted according to your oath. I made another cup of tea and opened a book I'd been trying to finish for weeks. I read until my eyes grew heavy, then went to bed and slept soundly through the night. Because my conscience was clear. I submitted the report at 0800 Monday morning through the encrypted portal used for ethics complaints. The system auto-generated a confirmation number and estimated timeline, preliminary review within 72 hours, initial contact from investigating officer within 1 week. I went about my normal duties. Morning brief at 0900, followed by coordination meetings with Army and Navy planners on upcoming exercises. Lunch at my desk while reviewing logistics timelines. Afternoon working group on inter-service communication protocols. Everything routine, professional, unremarkable. Jay stopped by my office at 15:30 hours, closing the door behind her. You filed it. This morning. She sat in the chair across from my desk. Captain J. Park had been my friend since Squadron Officer School, where we'd been paired as roommates and discovered a shared impatience for inefficiency and respect for competence. She'd gone into intelligence, currently working in analysis at the Pentagon 3 buildings over from mine. How are you doing? She asked. Fine. Busy day. Lena. I looked up from my computer. Her expression was gentle but insistent, the look that said she wasn't accepting surface-level responses. I'm fine, I repeated. The report is filed. It's out of my hands now. The system will handle it. And your mom. I texted her a summary of that conversation Saturday morning. Still convinced I'm overreacting. She called yesterday to try again. I didn't answer. She'll come around. Maybe. I wasn't sure I believed it, but I appreciated Jay's optimism. She leaned back in the chair, studying me. You know this might get complicated. I know. There could be blowback. People asking questions. Keating might have allies who push back. I know that too. And you're still sure? I met her eyes directly. He grabbed my wrist and told me I'd do as he said. In uniform. In public. If I don't report that, what message does it send? That it's acceptable as long as it's a date? That women should just tolerate it? No, Jay said firmly. You're right. I'm not questioning your decision. I'm making sure you're prepared for what might come. I am. She nodded slowly. Okay, then I've got your back. Whatever you need. Thank you. After she left, I returned to work, pushing through spreadsheets and scheduling conflicts until 1800 hours. I drove home, made dinner, went for a run through my neighborhood, showered, and settled in to watch a documentary about the Apollo program. My phone buzzed at 2100 hours. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was from Commander Keating. Major Rourke, this is Tom Keating. I'd like to speak with you about the report you filed. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. I've served honorably for 20 years. I don't deserve to have my career destroyed over a bad date where both of us were nervous and maybe misread signals. Please call me back so we can resolve this like adults before it escalates further. His tone was measured, reasonable, almost wounded. The kind of tone designed to make me feel guilty, to second-guess my judgment, to wonder if maybe I had overreacted. I deleted the voicemail and blocked the number. Tuesday morning, I received an email from the Joint Ethics Office. Lieutenant Commander Mira Soto, Navy JAG, assigned as preliminary investigator. She requested an interview at my earliest convenience. I responded immediately, offering Thursday at 1400 hours. Her reply came within the hour, confirmed. Wednesday, my mother called again. This time I answered. Lena, we need to talk. I'm at work, Mom. This will only take a moment. Thomas's mother called me. She's devastated. She says you filed some kind of official complaint that could end his career. She doesn't understand why you're doing this. I filed a factual report about his behavior. She says he tried to apologize, that he left you a voicemail, and you blocked him. How is that fair? How is he supposed to make amends if you won't even speak to him? Mom, once misconduct is reported, informal contact is inappropriate. The investigation process handles it. Investigation? Lena, this is insane. You're treating a bad date like a criminal case. It's not a criminal case. It's an ethics review. And it's standard procedure. For what? For a man being too forward on a date? For making you uncomfortable? That's not a crime. For an O5 officer physically restraining an O4 officer and issuing what he framed as an order during a social encounter. That violates conduct standards. You're splitting hairs. You're using technical language to justify destroying someone's life. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers to the bridge of my nose. I'm not destroying his life. I'm reporting behavior that violates our code of conduct. If the investigation finds no wrongdoing, then there are no consequences. If it finds he violated standards, then he faces appropriate accountability. That's how the system works. The system, my mother said bitterly, is being weaponized by women who can't handle normal male behavior. You're part of that problem. The words landed like a slap. I stood there in my office, door closed, phone pressed to my ear, and felt the full weight of her judgment. I need to go, Mom. Lena, wait, I ended the call. Then I sat down at my desk, opened my personal journal, a habit from my deployment days, and wrote for 20 minutes. Not about Keating, not about the investigation. About my mother, about the gulf between us, about the realization that some people will always prioritize institutional loyalty over individual justice. When I finished writing, I felt clearer. Sadder, but clearer. Thursday at 1400 hours, I met Lieutenant Commander Soto in a conference room at the Pentagon. She was early 40s, sharp-eyed, with the precise manner of someone who'd conducted hundreds of these interviews. We sat across from each other at the small table, recording device between us. Major Rourke, thank you for meeting with me. This interview is part of a preliminary inquiry into your report filed Monday regarding Commander Thomas Keating. Everything we discuss is confidential and protected under investigative protocols. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Please walk me through the events of November 18th in your own words. I did. Chronologically, factually, without embellishment. The dinner, the interruptions, the condescension, the wrist grab, the statement, my response, his reaction. She asked clarifying questions, exact times, specific words used, physical descriptions of contact, any witnesses. The restaurant has security cameras, I mentioned. The table we sat at would likely be visible. She made a note. We'll request that footage. Did anyone else witness the physical contact? Possibly other diners, but I don't have identifying information. Understood. After you left the restaurant, did Commander Keating attempt further contact? He left a voicemail Monday evening. I deleted it and blocked his number. Do you have any record of that voicemail? No. I deleted it immediately. She nodded, writing. Has anyone else contacted you on his behalf? His mother contacted my mother, who then called me twice to convince me to withdraw the report. And your response? I declined. She asked more questions, circling back to specific details, testing consistency. I answered each one calmly, precisely, the way I'd learned to brief senior officers, facts only, no interpretation unless requested. After 45 minutes, she closed her notebook. Thank you, Major. Your statement has been clear and consistent. I'll be conducting additional interviews and reviewing available evidence. You'll be notified of any developments. In the meantime, avoid contact with Commander Keating or anyone acting on his behalf. Understood. As I stood to leave, she added quietly, Major Rourke, I've been doing this work for 8 years. I want you to know that filing this report took courage. Not everyone does. I just did what the regulations require, ma'am. That's exactly my point. I left the Pentagon and drove back to Andrews, her words echoing in my head. Courage. I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd thought of it as duty, as obligation, as basic accountability. But maybe that was what courage looked like in practice, doing the required thing even when the personal cost was high. Friday afternoon, Jay texted, drinks tonight? Can't. Need to catch up on work. That's code for I'm avoiding people. I'm coming over at 1900. I'll bring Thai food. She showed up at 1900 hours exactly, carrying bags of pad Thai and spring rolls. We ate on my couch, watching a cooking competition show neither of us cared about, the companionship mattering more than conversation. Finally, during a commercial break, she asked, how's the investigation going? Preliminary interview was Thursday. They're reviewing evidence. How long until resolution? Weeks, probably. Maybe months if it escalates. She nodded, pulling her knees up to her chest. You know the base is talking, right? About what? About a female Air Force major filing an ethics complaint against a Navy commander. Details are vague, but people are curious. I'd expected this. Military bases were small communities. News traveled. What are they saying? Most people don't know enough to say anything specific. But there are factions, some saying you must have had good reason, others saying it's probably blown out of proportion. And you've heard this how? Intelligence community. We hear everything. She smiled slightly. For what it's worth, the people whose opinions matter think you did the right thing. And the others? Don't matter. I wanted to believe that. But I also knew that in military culture, reputation could be as important as performance. Being labeled as someone who couldn't take a joke or filed complaints over nothing could shadow a career. I'm not backing down, I said quietly. I know. That's why I'm here. To make sure you don't isolate yourself through this. We finished the food and talked about other things, her upcoming assignment, a mutual friend's promotion, the bureaucratic absurdity of Pentagon parking. Normal conversation, normal friendship, a reminder that life continued beyond the investigation. After she left, I cleaned up the containers and sat by my window, looking out at the November darkness. Somewhere in this same city, Commander Keating was probably panicking, calling allies, crafting defenses, preparing for the possibility that his carefully constructed career might unravel. I felt no satisfaction in that. No vindication. Just the quiet certainty that I'd done what needed to be done. And whatever consequences followed for him, for me, for both of us, would unfold according to the truth of what had happened, not the comfort of what people wanted to believe. The restaurant provided security footage within a week. Lieutenant Commander Soto called to inform me that the video clearly showed the wrist contact, the duration, and my visible response. Your account is corroborated, she said. The inquiry is escalating to full investigation. That's when things accelerated. The Navy opened an official investigation into conduct unbecoming an officer. A formal notification went to Keating's chain of command. His current assignment was placed under review. A second investigator was assigned to examine broader patterns. Had there been other incidents, other complaints, other behaviors suggesting this wasn't isolated? There had been. Within days of the investigation expanding, 2 former junior officers came forward. Both Navy, both women. Both with stories about Commander Keating. One described a meeting where he'd stood too close, touched her lower back while reviewing documents, made comments about her appearance that had nothing to do with performance. She hadn't reported it because she was 02 and he was 05, and she'd been told by a mentor that making waves early in your career isn't smart. The second officer had been on his staff 3 years ago. She'd filed an informal complaint with HR about inappropriate comments regarding female sailors under his command, jokes about their physical fitness, speculation about their personal lives, a general atmosphere of gender-based harassment. The complaint had been noted, he'd received counseling, and it had gone nowhere. Lieutenant Commander Soto called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Major Rourke, I wanted you to be aware that additional evidence has surfaced supporting a pattern of behavior. This is no longer about a single incident. The investigation is examining Commander Keating's broader conduct over several years. I understand. You should also know that his defense team is preparing a counter-narrative. They'll likely argue that you misinterpreted a social situation, that any physical contact was brief and unintentional, that filing a report was disproportionate to the offense. Let them argue. They may also suggest that you had ulterior motives, career advancement, personal vendetta, bias against male officers. None of that is true. I know, but you should be prepared for the accusations. I was. I'd spent 12 years preparing for exactly this, the moment when reporting misconduct would be met with attacks on credibility, character, and motivation. The emails started that week. Not from Keating directly, he'd been ordered to cease contact, but from people adjacent to him. A Navy captain who'd served with him sent a carefully worded message questioning whether I'd fully considered the implications of my report. A retired admiral, friend of Keating's family, sent a note suggesting that young officers sometimes mistake assertiveness for aggression. I forwarded every message to Lieutenant Commander Soto without responding. Jay came by Friday evening. You're trending in the group chat. What group chat? The informal network of female officers across services. Someone mentioned your case, no names, but enough detail that people are connecting dots. The consensus is solidarity. That's nice, I guess. It's more than nice, Lena. It matters. You're not alone in this. Except I felt alone. My mother hadn't called in 2 weeks. My father was gone. The investigation process was confidential, meaning I couldn't discuss details with anyone except investigators and legal counsel. I went to work, performed my duties, came home, and existed in a strange liminal space between normal life and waiting for resolution. Then Commander Keating made a mistake. He sent me an email from a personal account, bypassing the directive to cease contact. The email was long, rambling, shifting between apology and accusation. He claimed he'd meant no harm, that he'd always respected female officers, that I was destroying a good man's life over a misunderstanding. Then he suggested I was too sensitive for military service and should consider whether this career is the right fit. I forwarded it to Lieutenant Commander Soto immediately. Her response came within the hour. This constitutes violation of investigative protocols and will be added to the case file. Do not respond. The email became evidence of poor judgment, inability to follow orders, and continued harassment. It significantly weakened his defense. 2 weeks later, the preliminary findings were complete. Lieutenant Commander Soto requested a final interview. We met in the same conference room. She laid out the investigation's conclusions. Commander Keating had engaged in conduct unbecoming an officer on multiple occasions with multiple individuals. The pattern suggested abuse of authority, gender-based harassment, and failure to maintain professional standards. The restaurant incident with me was the most recent and most clearly documented, but it existed within a broader context of misconduct. What happens now? I asked. The findings go to a review board. They'll determine appropriate administrative action. Possible outcomes range from formal reprimand to separation from service. And his promotion? His packet for 06 has been withdrawn. He will not be promoted to captain. I absorbed this information without reaction. This was the consequence I'd anticipated, the outcome his behavior had earned. Major Rourke, Lieutenant Commander Soto said, I want to acknowledge something. This investigation required your willingness to stand by your statement despite significant pressure to withdraw. That kind of integrity is rare. It's also essential to maintaining standards across the services. I just reported what happened. You did more than that. You held the line. After the meeting, I walked through the Pentagon corridors, past the endless offices and conference rooms, past the portraits of former service chiefs, past the memorial wall honoring those who'd died in service. I thought about all the people who'd worn these uniforms, who'd taken the same oath, who'd faced their own tests of integrity. Some had passed. Some had failed. The system only worked when people chose to uphold it, even when it was difficult, even when it was lonely, even when the personal cost was high. I'd chosen to uphold it. Whatever happened next, to Keating's career, to my reputation, to the broader conversation about accountability, I could live with that choice. I drove home as the sun set over Virginia, the sky streaked with orange and purple. I ordered takeout, poured a glass of wine, and called Jay. It's done, I told her. The investigation concluded. They found a pattern of misconduct. How do you feel? I considered the question carefully. Tired. Relieved. Sad that it was necessary. But certain I did the right thing. That's all you can ask for. We talked for another hour about nothing important. Weekend plans, a new restaurant she wanted to try, the upcoming Air Force Navy football game. Normal conversation between friends, a reminder that life existed beyond investigations and accountability boards. After we hung up, I sat on my couch in the quiet apartment and let myself feel the full weight of the past month. The confrontation at dinner, the difficult conversations with my mother, the investigation process, the waiting, the pressure. But also the support from Jay, the professionalism of Lieutenant Commander Soto, the courage of the two women who'd come forward with their own stories. I'd stood alone at the restaurant table when I placed that coin down. But I hadn't stayed alone. That realization settled something in me, a sense that the system, imperfect, slow, frustrating, could still work when people chose to engage it honestly. I opened my laptop and wrote an email to my mother. Not angry, not defensive. Just clear. Mom, I know you disagree with my decision to report Commander Keating. I understand that your generation had different expectations about what women should tolerate in military service. But my oath requires me to maintain standards, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. I hope someday you'll understand that I did this not to destroy someone's career, but to uphold the values we all claim to believe in. I love you. I miss talking to you. But I won't apologize for doing my duty. I sent it before I could second-guess the words. Then I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new duties, new tests of character. But tonight, I slept soundly, knowing my conscience was clear. The review board convened 6 weeks later. I wasn't required to attend, but Lieutenant Commander Soto kept me informed of the proceedings. Commander Keating appeared with counsel, presented his defense, challenged the investigation's findings. The board reviewed all evidence, the security footage, the additional complaints, the email he'd sent violating contact protocols, witness statements, his service record. The decision came down in mid-January. Formal reprimand, removal from leadership pipeline, mandatory counseling, effectively ending any path to Navy captain. He could remain in service at his current rank if he accepted the terms, or he could request retirement. He chose retirement. Lieutenant Commander Soto called to inform me. Commander Keating has submitted retirement paperwork. He'll be separated from service within 90 days. The case is closed. Thank you for keeping me informed. Major Rourke, one more thing. Your conduct throughout this process has been exemplary. You maintained professionalism, cooperated fully with investigators, and demonstrated the kind of character the military needs in senior leadership. I've submitted a commendation for your file noting your integrity during a difficult situation. I hadn't expected that. That wasn't necessary, ma'am. It absolutely was. Too often, people who do the right thing face only consequences. You deserve recognition. After we hung up, I sat at my desk processing the finality of it. Commander Keating's career was over. Not because I'd destroyed it, but because his own behavior had created a record that couldn't be defended. The system had worked slowly, imperfectly, but ultimately with accountability. I felt no triumph. Just a quiet sense of completion. Jay took me out for dinner that evening to celebrate closure, though celebration felt like the wrong word. We sat in a quiet Korean restaurant, eating bibimbap and talking about the future rather than the past. What happens with your mom? She asked. I don't know. She never responded to my email. Give her time. Some people need distance to understand. Maybe. My promotion recommendation for 05 came through in February. The selection board would meet in spring, with results announced in summer. Colonel Hensley called me to his office to discuss it. Major Rourke, your package is strong. Your performance has been exceptional, your evaluations are top tier, and you've demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment we need in field-grade officers. I'm recommending you with highest confidence. Thank you, sir. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. I'm also aware of the investigation you were involved in. For what it's worth, handling that with the professionalism you showed, that tells me more about your character than any evaluation could. I appreciate that, sir. The Air Force needs officers who understand that rank comes with responsibility, not permission. You've proven you understand that distinction. I left his office feeling something shift inside me. Not pride exactly, but a sense of alignment, my values and my profession finally in harmony rather than tension. Spring brought warmer weather and new assignments. I was detailed to lead a joint planning cell coordinating Air Force and Navy logistics for upcoming Pacific exercises. The work was complex, challenging, exactly what I needed to stay focused forward rather than looking back. My mother called in late March. Lena. Hi, Mom. I got your email. I've been thinking about it for a long time. I waited, letting her find her words. I spoke with some other military spouses, women whose daughters serve. They helped me understand some things I didn't want to see. Her voice wavered slightly. I was wrong. About Thomas, about dismissing what you told me, about putting his reputation above your safety. I'm sorry. The apology landed softly, unexpectedly. I'd prepared myself for permanent distance, for a relationship that never recovered. Thank you for saying that. Your father would be proud of you. I should have said that immediately. Instead, I defended someone who didn't deserve it. You were working with the information you had. No, I was working with assumptions. There's a difference. She paused. Can I take you to lunch sometime? I'd like to hear about your work, your life. Not military wife to military daughter. Just mother and daughter. I'd like that. We met the following weekend at a cafe near her house. She asked questions about my assignment, listened without judgment, laughed at my stories about bureaucratic absurdities. Toward the end of the meal, she reached across the table and took my hand. I'm proud of you, Lena. Not just for your rank or your service. For your integrity. For being stronger than I was. I squeezed her hand. You raised me to have integrity, Mom. You just forgot that applies everywhere, not just where it's comfortable. I won't forget again. We were rebuilding. Slowly, carefully, but genuinely. The promotion results were released in July. I made the list for Lieutenant Colonel, 05. My pinning ceremony was scheduled for September. Jay insisted on organizing a small reception afterward. You're not getting out of celebrating this time. You saved a bunch of junior officers from future harassment, maintained standards under pressure, and still got promoted. That deserves recognition. The ceremony was simple. Colonel Hensley presided. My mother attended. Jay stood beside me as my friend and witness. When the new rank insignia went on my uniform, I felt the weight of it differently than my previous promotions. Not just achievement, but responsibility. Not just advancement, but accountability. At the reception, several junior female officers approached me quietly, separately. Each had a version of the same story. They'd heard about my case. They appreciated what it meant. They felt more confident knowing the system could work. One captain, Air Force intel officer, said, I've been debating whether to report something that happened last year. I convinced myself it wasn't worth the fight. But seeing how your case was handled, it matters. It tells me maybe the fight is worth it. If it violated standards, I told her, then it's worth reporting. Not for revenge. For accountability. She nodded slowly. I'll think about it. Later, when most people had left, my mother pulled me aside. There was a woman at my book club last week. Her daughter is at the Naval Academy, first year. She asked me about you. She'd heard somehow that you'd been involved in something significant. I told her the truth. That you'd reported misconduct, that it had been difficult, and that you'd done it anyway because it was right. She thanked me. Said her daughter needed to know that the system could work. What did you say? I said the system works when people like my daughter choose to uphold it, even when it costs them something. I hugged her then, feeling the distance that had opened between us finally close. That evening, alone in my apartment, I took out the Admiral's coin. It sat heavy in my palm, brass worn smooth from being carried in my pocket for months. I thought about the night I'd placed it on that restaurant table, the moment everything changed. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a coin hitting a table. A report filed on Monday morning. A woman choosing not to minimize, not to excuse, not to look away. It was staying calm when someone grabbed your wrist. Speaking clearly when someone told you to obey. Walking out when someone tried to gaslight you into believing your judgment was flawed. It was standing by your statement when people pressured you to withdraw. Forwarding threatening emails instead of responding. Trusting the process even when it felt agonizingly slow. Most of all, it was understanding that accountability wasn't personal. It wasn't about ruining someone's life. It was about maintaining the standards that made the uniform mean something beyond fabric and rank. Commander Keating had retired quietly, no public disgrace, just a career that ended earlier than planned. I'd heard through informal channels that he'd moved to Florida, taken a defense contractor job, tried to move on. I hoped he'd learned something. I hoped he'd changed. But whether he had or hadn't, the outcome wasn't really about him. It was about the junior female officer who now knew she could report misconduct without her career ending. It was about the next man who might think twice before grabbing someone's wrist and expecting compliance. It was about proving that rank didn't excuse abuse, that gender didn't determine whose word mattered, that the system could work if people chose to engage it honestly. I put the coin back in my pocket, where it would stay. A reminder of what boundaries protect, what standards require, what justice looks like when you strip away the noise and focus on truth. I was Lieutenant Colonel Lena Rourke now, 05, United States Air Force. I'd earned that rank through competence, dedication, and the kind of integrity that didn't bend when tested. I'd faced my test that November evening. I'd passed by doing something deceptively simple, refusing to minimize what happened, trusting my judgment, and holding the line. Sometimes that's all courage is. Not dramatic confrontation. Just quiet refusal to accept unacceptable behavior. I didn't tell the story often. Only when another junior officer needed to hear it. Only when someone was debating whether to report something, whether to speak up, whether to risk the comfort of silence for the uncertainty of accountability. Then I told them what I'd learned. You do not have to shrink for anyone. Rank does not excuse abuse. Your judgment matters. And sometimes the quietest decisions end careers, not because you destroyed someone, but because they destroyed themselves, and you simply refused to help them hide it. The story didn't end with revenge or vindication or dramatic confrontation. It ended with me standing in formation, wearing my new rank, surrounded by people who respected what it represented. It ended with a mother and daughter rebuilding trust. It ended with a system that, however imperfect, had ultimately worked because someone chose to use it. And it ended with the understanding that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a coin hitting a table. Sometimes that's enough. That's how one blind date turned into a career-ending lesson in accountability. I didn't plan it, but I also wasn't going to let someone hide behind rank to get away with disrespect. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with someone who tried to use power, status, or authority to control you? Did you call it out, or did you wish you had? And what did standing up for yourself cost or save? Drop your story in the comments. And if you want more real experiences about boundaries, confidence, and refusing to shrink for anyone, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your voice matters more than you think.